Okay, I want to welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about supplementing protein for profitability or for production profitability. We'll spend a lot of time talking about protein supplementation, but we're also going to spend some time talking about energy supplementation as well. But a lot of what we'll discuss today comes from philosophy that's been of mine that's been created from the beginning, from when I first got into the beef business and bought my first cattle, which would probably be early 90s, and something I struggled with. This is a lot of what you'll see today has to do with or at least some of what I did was getting my PhD at Oklahoma State. So there's a lot of supplementation strategies from Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and also some Texas A&M that we'll talk about. But really, what I want to do uh, first is talk about uh, we'll begin with talking about the physiology of cattle. So I think it's important that you have a background in physiology, and that's probably more science than what a lot of us need. But I think it's important to understand how the digestive system of cattle uses uh, nutrients that we feed them, because that really affects ruminants and how we supplement them. Ruminants have a unique digestive system, which we'll get into here in just a second. Okay. So first, we'll talk about the physiology. There it goes. Of the ruminant. We'll start by the ruminant stomach. The ruminant has a multi-compartmental stomach, which is different than every other species, including horses. Horses, pigs, dogs, cats, and you all have a simple stomach. You have one stomach that produces acid that begins the digestive process. But in cattle, it's different, and we'll get into some of that. So food is going to be soaked and subject to digestion by microbes. I call them bugs in the rumen. And those bugs are going to, or microbes, bacteria, protozoa, and fungi, but mostly bacteria. You can think of it as like the rumen as a fermentation vat. So we're going to ferment similar to if you're making alcohol, and we're going to get energy and protein out of that. And so, the big part of what we're going to discuss today is going to be you have to feed the bacteria or bugs, which are going to feed the animals. And so really we're supplementing bacteria, which are going to supplement the cattle. We'll get into that here in just a minute. All right, the four parts of stomach. The rumen, reticulum, omasum, and abomasum. We want to go through those real quick. And I may do an additional presentation at some point on digestive physiology, so we get more into this. But you can see we have the esophagus there. That's where food comes in from the mouth into the esophagus, and then it enters into the stomach. Heavy things are going to fall into the reticulum, and I'm not sure if you can see my pointer or not, but okay. So here we go. So we have the reticulum here. Heavy stuff that comes into the esophagus falls into the reticulum. Lighter stuff goes into the rumen. I'll show you a real rumen here in a minute. It's divided into four compartments, which are really fermentation vats. They're going to ferment. But heavy stuff falls in the reticulum. The reticulum is going to have these ridges that are going to grind and reduce the particle size. So if you're, for example, if they're eating hay, heavier, more dense, and bigger particles are going to fall into the reticulum, and they're going to get reduced particle size. Now that's a great system. The problem is very quickly that other things that are heavy fall in here as well. So that's where you get something that's called hardware disease. And hardware disease, you'd be amazed. I worked for a vet for several years and working for the university when we would cut open cattle. You'd be amazed what you'll find in this reticulum. You'll find everything from nails, barbed wire, all kinds of metal pieces. Probably the weirdest thing I've ever seen is we had a calf that was for someone who worked for the university I come from, and he wanted to say, this calf was healthy, why did it die? We cut it open. It was full of, I'm going to guess, hundreds of Walmart sacks. And it was near a dump, so we're assuming that those sacks just kind of got blown in their pasture, that this calf just kept eating them. Why he just wanted to eat those sacks is beyond me, but this whole stomach was full of Walmart sacks as well as the small and large intestine. So that's what he died from. But you'll see hardware disease, the common the signs that I've seen over the years is that you'll stand on a tank dam at an angle. And what that does, that relieves that pressure. Because when you get a nail in here, it just keeps irritating that same spot and that same spot. And so they'll stand on a tank dam or an incline to relieve that pressure and get it off of that irritating the reticulum. Also, it can cause death. I've never seen this, but talking to vets that have been around for a while. That can puncture the reticulum, and the heart sits very close to the reticulum. It can actually puncture the heart, and that's can cause death. So here's what the reticulum looks like right here. It's going to have all these grooves, and those grooves are made to grind that like especially long stem forage and grind it into a smaller particle size. Once it gets in a smaller particle size, you know, cattle chew their cud, they regurgitate. A wave starts back here, pushes up in the esophagus, they chew their cud and they swallow. Again, heavy stuff will fall in the reticulum, and other stuff will go into the rumen. So let's focus on the rumen real quick. This is the rumen that we cut open at Cameron. And you can see here's our 4 compartments, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's the esophagus. Heavy stuff goes into the reticulum. And here we have our rumen over here. If you cut this open, this is what it looks like. And again, this is just fermenting feed. And it's sitting in these compartments and fermenting with bacteria, fungi, and protozoa, mostly bacteria. You remove that, and I'll show you this picture because this is one of the things that makes a rumen unique. Not only does digestion really happen in the rumen, which is different than the stomach, it just kind of starts in the stomach of a simple animal. Also can absorb. So this is the rumen, and it has these little finger-like projections called papilla, which are very similar to the small intestine, and they can actually absorb nutrients across the rumen. We'll come back to this because this allows us to recirculate and reuse nitrogen in the rumen, which we'll talk about in a minute. So very similar to the papilla and the small intestine. It's designed to increase surface area so you can absorb nutrients, and we have nutrient transport in the rumen, which is different than any other species. So we got our reticulum. We're fermenting. Once our stuff is fermented, our feedstuffs, they go into the omasum. The omasum is also known as mini piles. It's just piles of tissue upon each other, again, trying to reduce particle size before it goes into the next compartment, which is the abomasum, which is the true stomach of the cattle. Once you get into the abomasum, that's just like your stomach, like a pig's stomach. It's going to basically produce, it's a glandular organ that's going to secrete hydrochloric acid and digestion, start that part of digestion. So once we get to here, we're like a simple stomach animal. And then we come out the small intestine, and everything's very similar to other species. So it's the ruminant stomach that allows cattle to go out there, graze Bermuda grass or orchard grass, hay, and we're going to use that and get energy and nutrients out of that. All right. I like this. When I was teaching, I would use this slide a lot because I like to compare a monogastric, so this could be a pig, a dog, a cat, and a ruminant animal, cattle. So when we're feeding these animals, we're going to feed true protein. Now remember, protein, I always look at protein as like a train. And then the cars on a train are the amino acids. And the amino acids make the protein unique, just like the cars on the train make the train unique. And so what we're going to have to do is break this train, or this protein, into its building blocks, which are amino acids. Now what makes amino acids unique is they contain nitrogen. Other than that, they're really just carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, like everything else, just like carbs and fats. But the nitrogen makes them unique. So we can feed protein, but we can also feed any source of nitrogen. NPN is non-protein nitrogen. So we can feed nitrogen or protein to the bacteria in the rumen. So let's start with the monogastric animal. We feed true protein. They can't do anything with nitrogen. They break that train into its building blocks, the amino acids or the cars, and then those amino acids are absorbed in the gut, and they use it to make muscle. They use it to make antibodies. They use it to make hormones. So they use it to build their own trains or their own proteins once inside, absorbed across the gut in the animal. Now, ruminants are different. The true protein, some of that does what we call bypass protein, gets into the small intestine and is broken into amino acids, just like a monogastric. But that's a small percentage. And we'll come back to that in just a little bit as well. But you can also feed any source of nitrogen. And these bugs that are in the rumen, they can actually make protein. They can build protein. So we have a protein that's broken into amino acids and made into microbial protein. And we have any source of nitrogen that's made into microbial protein. You may say, who cares? Well, that allows us to feed any source of nitrogen, like urea, biuret. And we'll talk about when you should feed urea and biuret and when you shouldn't today. And that allows them to make microbial protein out of that. And then microbial protein is broken down into amino acids, just like in a simple stomach animal or monogastric animal. So the way to look at this is you are feeding cattle. When you feed cattle protein or nitrogen, they're feeding the bugs, which feed the cattle. So you got to feed the bugs to feed the cattle. And that's the key. And we'll get into some of that today. All right. So very quickly, this is a little more science than you probably need, but I think it proves a point that we'll get into later. Those microorganisms, they're going to break those proteins into amino acids and peptides, and they're going to further degrade that into ammonia and organic acids and carbon dioxide. Well, you may say, who cares about that? The reason you should care about that is ammonia can then be absorbed through the rumen wall, through those papilia, and recycled. So this is unique, and it allows cattle to recycle that nitrogen. So you get maximum use out of that nitrogen. And other animals, when you feed a pig, what that small intestine doesn't use comes out the back end. But in cattle, they can reabsorb that nitrogen and make it as MPN into microbial protein. So they recirculate and recycle that. That's a very unique thing with the cattle, and allows us, that we'll get into later, allows us to not have to supplement cattle. Allows us to supplement protein every other day or every third day, which we'll talk about later. So this is the reason why when we talk about that. So anytime, again, you're talking about cattle, you got to think that what's supplying that animal, most of their protein is coming from microbial protein. So it's microbial protein that supplies the lower tract, the small intestine, with a fairly consistent average quality protein. What does that mean? Well, that means we can feed any kind of low and moderate quality protein, like even nitrogen, like urea. We can feed just nitrogen, urea, and they can make that into an average quality protein. So we can improve the source or the protein quality of poor protein supplements or just nitrogen. But the opposite of that's true too. And this is what a lot of people think about. That's awesome. We can feed, just throw some nitrogen in our feed and they can make protein out of it. But the opposite is true too. When we balance diets for swine, for example, we're going to balance on lysine, and we're going to feed lysine. That's very expensive. Now, you feed expensive amino acids to cattle, they're going to take that high-quality protein or amino acid source, and they're going to make it into an average quality protein. So you can decrease the quality of high-protein supplements. That's why we don't feed a lot of high-protein supplements like you do in growing pigs, for example, or poultry diets, or dog diets. Because they're going to take that expensive ingredient and just make it into an average microbial protein. All right, I like this slide. We'll go through it quick, and then we're going to move on past anatomy. But I like this slide because I think it does a good idea of summarizing what we've been talking about and really what's going on in this rumen. So this is the rumen. Then we pass into the small intestine. Okay. Here we have we feed true protein to cattle, and we also feed MPN, like urea, just a source of nitrogen. Let's focus on the true protein. When we feed that, in this example, about 40% of that bypasses a rumen. The bacteria don't get a chance to get at it, and it goes into the small intestine. It's treated just like in a simple stomach animal. 60% of it, it's broken down to amino acids and then to ammonia, nitrogen, and that's going to go into the microbes. They're going to make microbial protein out of that, and then they're going to, microbial protein is the majority of the protein that's in the small intestine. That is what the cattle are going to use to meet their requirements, which is absorbed in the blood. Okay? Now, let's say the bacteria didn't get a chance to use all of that nitrogen. Well, it's recycled, like we talk about, to the liver, into the saliva, and when they swallow, they masticate and swallow, that's going to go directly into the rumen, and then it can be made into microbial protein. And then the same thing is true of any type of MP, any type of nitrogen is going to go into the rumen, used by the bugs to make microbial protein, which meets the requirements. So you really got a kind of a complex system here that's greatly affected by how much protein we feed the animal. And that's what we're going to get into today. All right, we're supplementing beef cattle. Why is this so important? Because it's 40% of the total operating cost of your beef cattle operations. That's going to vary. But if you look at a lot of the studies that they've done, studying across the country, that's kind of the average, 40% of the operating cost. That means nutrition can be a target to trim cost of production. And I've gotten into this trap. When I first got into the beef business, I purchased cattle in the early 90s. Prices were high, not as high as now, but they were good. And I rode that cattle cycle all the way down. So things got tight. So what did I do? I was a dumb kid just, in high school and into high school and into college. I started trying to look at ways to trim costs, and I started trimming nutrition because it's 40% of your cost. So I fell into that trap, and it greatly affected production. So my cows were too thin. They didn't reproduce because we know nutritional status of the cows closely related to reproductive performance. And this is something I did a lot of my PhD was on body condition score of cattle and different supplementation of cattle to improve reproductive performance. And so this is something I'll do a webinar on body condition scoring cattle because I'm a big believer in it. But there's the number one thing that's going to determine if that cow is going to cycle after she gives birth, if she's going to reproduce and get pregnant, is body condition score that she has when she calves. And that's the number one thing. So if we are not supplementing, if their body condition is too low, it's going to affect reproductive performance. And yes, there are things, a lot of people make the argument, well, I have a cow that she's all skin and bones and she still reproduces. And that's true, and there's people that are that way too. But there is a relationship between body fat in all species and reproduction and pregnancy rates. And your pregnancy rates, if you get a body condition score of 4, they're going to drop drastically. All right, so we'll come back to that in another webinar. Now, the key, coming from a company that we sell, I make a living off of selling feed, this isn't necessarily the best thing to tell you, but really grazing management's the key. The key to reducing supplementing costs is having a good grazing management. And I've been extremely impressed since I've been in Colorado. You do manage your cattle, your pastures, much better than we do in Texas and Oklahoma. Texas, Oklahoma, we graze and overgraze and overgraze. Where here, y'all do a better, most people do a better job of managing the land. So grazing management the key. However, there are times that you're going to have to supplement nutrients. That may be vitamins and minerals through most of the year, but there are going to be times when forage is not going to be adequate to meet what that cattle needs. And that's when we got to supplement. So I would start with my supplementation program, which we're not going to talk about today, but I would start with my grazing management. Start with my forage. If you're going into winter and it's hay, start with my hay. And then, or my forage, and see what is missing, and we'll get into that in just a second. 2 things I want to throw out. When you're supplementing, you need to think about. One's a positive associative effect, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. The other is a negative associative effect. A negative associative effect is where my supplementation decreases my forage intake. So decreases my hay or decreases my pasture forage intake. That is going to happen as a rule of thumb when you feed concentrate over 0.5% of body weight. So 0.5% of body weight. A 1,000-pound cow, that's 5 pounds. 1,100-pound cow, that'd be 5.5 pounds. When I get over that rate, she starts replacing supplement for hay or grass. And that's not a desirable thing in a lot of situations because we have this grass out there, we have our hay, we want them using that and getting the most out of that. But it can be a desirable situation. For example, when we just came out of the drought in Oklahoma, that was devastating for a lot of people. And they, instead of reducing cow numbers, they started feeding concentrate because they didn't have the grass to feed them. So you feed concentrate at a higher rate than 0.5%. They eat less grass and less forage. Okay, so let's talk about positive associative effect. That's really what we're going to focus on today. A good way to look at this, or when this is going to happen, I'll go ahead and give you the definition. A positive associative effect is my supplement is going to cause it stimulate my forage intake. It's going to stimulate forage intake and digestibility of that forage. So it has a positive effect on my forage, my base forage. So we're going to base our diets on forage. My supplement's going to improve what I get out of that forage, but also increase intake. When does that happen? This happens when you provide a protein supplementation on low quality, low protein forages. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What time of the year does this happen? Generally late summer. However, in the drought, we saw it in spring, actually. You get maybe a little bit of growth, and then that was it for the year. So you have poor quality forage all year. We didn't get any rain and had extremely high temperatures in Oklahoma, Texas, and other parts of the plains. So, but in a general average year, late summer, fall, and winter, going into for example, August, September, October, through those period of times and into winter. So what's going on with this positive associative effect? And I'm going to give you some real data here in a minute that's going to show you what I'm talking about. But what the deal is, the bacteria in the bugs in the rumen, they don't have enough protein, so they start dying. So you have a lower population of bacteria because they require protein to live, just like the cow does. And this is a symbiotic relationship. You got to feed the bugs to feed the cattle. So we don't have enough protein for the bugs. The bugs there's less of them. So everything slows down. Digestion slows down. It sits in the rumen longer because there's fewer bugs that break it down. It sits in the small intestine and moves. Everything happens slower. So therefore, they eat less forage. And not only that, because there's less bugs, they get less out of it. So your digestibility goes down. So you decrease digestibility, you decrease forage intake. But if you provide protein supplementation, that allows more bugs. They divide, they multiply, and there's more bugs. They digest more forage, and so you get increased digestibility, but you also increase forage intake. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you now, you got to be careful with this because these cattle will be stimulated to eat, and this is not the thing to do when you don't have adequate forage. If you have a limited amount of hay, you don't want to be feeding a high protein supplement because they're going to eat more hay. Or if your forage is tight and you don't have, you're limited on forage out in pasture, you don't want to be feeding them this, a high protein supplement, because your forage is they're going to eat more forage. Okay? But not only that, it also increases digestibility for it. So you eat more and you get more out of it. And that's the key. So you increase digestibility and you increase forage intake. All right. So kind of to demonstrate that, this is a study at Oklahoma State, and this doesn't prove everything I talked about, but there's other studies that do. But here we have no supplement, and here they fed 1.75 pounds of a high protein supplement, a 38 to 41% crude protein supplement. And what happened? This is the time it spent in the rumen. With no supplement, it spent 75 hours in the rumen. With the high protein supplement, just 1.7 pounds per head per day, it spent 56 hours. You decrease the time by 32% that it spends in the rumen. That's a good thing, right? Because they're going to eat more. Voluntary intake, you can see that went from 1.7% of their body weight up to 2.15, so you eat 27% more. So this was demonstrating that the forage spends less time in the rumen, and they eat more of it. But now what's not in here that's in other studies is they actually get more out of it. So not only do you eat more, but you get more out of what you eat because you increase digestibility of that forage. Okay. So now let's talk about our supplementation program. We'll really start getting into some how to supplement. So I'm going to start off with, let's say that you a good example of this would be if you're feeding hay in the winter and how to develop a supplementation program for that. And then we'll end talking about more on pasture side where maybe you don't test your pasture as much as you would your hay. But for me, a supplementation program, step one is you determine the nutrient requirements of the cattle. What do my cattle need? Step two, estimate the nutrients that are in the forage. What is being provided in the forage? Okay, this is kind of Dr. White's supplementing for dummies, I guess, but I mean it's a very simple program, but it works. Step three, subtract 1 from 2 and determine if you have a deficiency or an excess. You'd be surprised when at Cameron, I'd have my students go out.
Colby, line 1. Colby, line 1.
I'd have my students go out and they would work with a producer. And you'd be surprised when they did this simple thing, how many times they actually had an excess and they were supplementing. They didn't need to be a supplement. Okay, and so that's the key. You need to know if I'm feeding my cattle in forage. We're going to base everything on forage. Is that giving me excess or is that not meeting my needs and I have a deficiency? And then step 4. Okay, let's see what I'm missing, and let's determine what is the cheapest way to provide that missing nutrient. And that's step 4. Okay, and so we're going to go through this in a real example. So break it down. Step 1, determine the nutrient requirements of cattle. We'll have access to this webinar, so that if you can't, I'm sure you can't get this website down or this PowerPoint, we'll have access to it on our website soon, and you'll be able to pull this up. But I'm going to go to very quickly that page and just show you, if you pull up that website, and this is what'll come up right here. And I like this website. This is done by Oklahoma State, but it does a really good job of breaking down not just growing cattle, but beef, replacement heifers, replacement bulls. And this looks at what are the requirements of cattle at different sizes, at different stages of growth throughout the cattle cycle. And so I really like this. It has lots of tables that you can go through, and you can say, okay, we're going to focus on 2 things. Energy. And energy in grazing cattle we're going to do in the form of TDN. That's just a measurement of the percent energy in that feed. And then crude protein. We're going to look at crude protein and TDN. Okay? So y'all can go back and do that and look up requirements of cattle of all different stages of development. Okay? All right, so now that's step one, determine nutrient requirements of cattle. Step two, and I should have left this one up as well. I'm going to give you two websites. One is going to be an Oklahoma State website. The other one is Dairy One. I like the Dairy One website because it really does a good example or does a good job of let you summarize by even by state. And so you can pull these up later. I'll very quickly pull them up again. And well, I lost my mouse. Okay, so this, oh, it's bringing it up now. This is the website by, and I've lost my mouse. So give me, if y'all would excuse me just for a second, let me get my mouse. There it is. Okay, so this is nutrient value of beef cattle. Same thing. It's going to give lots of different forages. It's really focused on kind of the Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska area. Still some application to this area as well, I think. But really, again, I like this. If you go to Dairy One, you can search by their average for different different forages, all of different types, and you can look at their state average, which will give you a closer estimate of what your forages are providing. So I like those two websites as kind of a resource. But I think the key is if you're feeding hay, is to get your hay tested. You can spend $30, $35 to get your hay tested, and I've seen examples where it saved people thousands of dollars. It saved producers thousands of dollars because they were not only, and we'll get into some of that today, not only were they supplementing probably when they didn't need to, but when they needed to, they were supplementing the wrong nutrient, which we'll get into here in just a second. So $35 if you get your hay tested, and contact your ranchway, either myself or one of our sales reps, and we can certainly help you do that. Okay. Now, the first question I get a lot of times is, hey, how much are my cattle going to eat? So I thought I'd throw out real quick this table here. I think it does a good example of giving you an estimate. Okay, how much of my forage are they going to eat? Well, if you take a low quality forage, they're going to eat about 1.8% of their body weight. And if you'll notice, as you increase the quality of the forage, so average quality, this would be like a late bloom legume hay, alfalfa, or this would be like a dry pasture in the fall, late summer. They're going to be about 2.2% of their body weight. When you go to high quality, 2.5, all the way down to a lush growing pasture, also will be about 2.5% of their body weight. The other thing is lactation. If they're lactating, they are going to eat more. And that's just a natural process of hormone stimulating feed intake. Okay. So now we know what our forage we're feeding. We know how much the animals need. And so let's look at this. This is using those two tables from Oklahoma State that I gave you the website of. 1,100 pound cow grazing native range during the last 1/3 of pregnancy. So she's in her last 1/3 of pregnancy. She's grazing dormant native grass going into the late fall and winter. What does she need? Well, her crude protein, she needs 1.8 pounds per day. Okay? Our forage is only supplying 0.88. You subtract 1 from 2 or 2 from 1, and you end up with a 0.92 pounds of protein that she needs. She is deficient by 0.92 pounds. Energy, she's also deficient in energy. Well, we have 12% energy or TDN that she needs. We're only supplying 10.8, so she's deficient in both protein and energy. Very common going into, especially late, like I said, summer, fall, and even into winter if you're grazing dormant range. Now let's look at the supplement. Our supplement options, I'm going to give you 3. First one is 5 pounds of a 20% crude protein supplement. The cost is $175 a ton, which I realize these costs are not exactly in line with what ingredient costs are today, but this still allows you to, I think, a good comparison. 4 pounds, 25% crude protein supplement, or 2.5 pounds of a 38% crude protein supplement. So what we're going to supply first, and what I'd recommend you always do, is look at protein first. Okay, so we're going to try to meet this protein requirement first. To meet 0.92, have a little bit of a fudge factor there. To provide 1 pound of protein, you need 5 pounds of 20s. 4 pounds of a 25% crude protein, and 2.5 pounds of a 38%. Those will all meet this missing requirement. Now let's look at, now what people do is they look at the cost. Oh man, 20s cost $175 a ton. I'm going to feed 20s. I'm not paying that $230. But what they don't realize is you have to feed twice as much of the 20s compared to the higher protein supplement. And that's what you're missing. You just look at the base cost and not what you're missing in your diet. That's why I think if you'll set up a table like this, okay, I'm missing protein, let's meet that. If you see all of these meet the protein requirements, look at the 20s. To meet the 1 pound of protein, I'm supplying a lot of extra energy. I need 1.2 pounds of energy, and I am supplying 3.75 pounds with my 20s. So there's a lot of extra energy in there. Sometimes that's good, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So there's definitely a point and a time for that. All right, the 24 pounds of a 25% crude protein, I'm supplying 3 pounds of energy, and I only need 1.2. If you look at our 2.5 pounds of a high protein supplement, I'm supplying 2 pounds of protein, and I only need 1, so I'm getting a little bit extra. Now let's look at the cost. This is the cost here. The cost per pound of protein is 44 cents for the 20s, 39 cents for the 4 pounds, and 29 cents for the higher protein. So even though it costs more up front, you're meeting an excess of energy, so they can gain maybe just a little bit of body condition, and you're meeting their protein requirements and saving that is 15 cents per pound. Okay. So let's break this down real quick. This is number 4. Like I said, you compare your options and what's missing, and look at cost. You're feeding excess energy with the 20% crude protein, which we just talked about. Okay? So excess energy is going to have increased body condition. So when that's needed, that's what you need. 20s are great. So when you need extra energy, if your cows are too thin, or even if they're marginal, this is what you need to be feeding, because you're going to give that energy as well as that protein. Okay? So, but if your cows are in good condition, this is really not necessary. And if you look at it costs $13.5 per cow if you're supplementing for 90 days. So for 3 months, you're going to cost, for 100 cows, it'll cost you $1,350 extra dollars per 100 cows, and to give them energy that they didn't need. Okay, but again, I want to reemphasize, sometimes energy is needed. If you're going into bad weather, energy requirements go up. And so those are things to think about as well. So 38% crude protein, again, it provided the protein just a little bit of energy, so you get the growth, you get a little bit of, you can certainly maintain body condition, maybe even gain a little bit. All right, so this is looking at they took the approach, instead of just feeding 2 pounds of a high protein supplement. This was a 40% crude protein supplement. It was a soybean meal based supplement. They fed, this is a study that was done, I don't remember for sure, but I want to say Kansas State. But you can see they're going to feed 2 pounds of 40% crude protein supplement. What happened? Okay. Well, the cows' weight changed. The cows that got 2 pounds per day of a 40% crude protein, they gained 23 pounds. But look at no supplement. They lost 153 pounds. That's a 176-pound difference just by providing 2 pounds of supplement a day. Okay? And I know people in Oklahoma and Texas that feed a lot more than this at 20s. Okay? Now, the unit of body condition score change, you can see dropped just a third of a body condition score here. But here you're dropping 1.5 body condition scores. All right? So if you look at the weaning weight, you have, not only did you're going to get more pregnant because they have better body condition score, but also look at the wean weight. These cows weigh 484 pound calves, where the no supplement weighed 448. And that just has to do with nutrition. Okay, you're not supplying the nutrients that those cows need. They're going to produce less milk. So you get an extra almost 40 pounds of weaning weight. That's a lot of money today. All right. So let's look at some. Y'all may say, okay, Dr. White, I don't have time to do that. I can't simply go out and create tables for my cattle. I just don't have time for that. So this really gives you an option to kind of give you a place to start. So we're not going to pay attention to fall calving. Let's just focus on spring calving. So now this would be based more again through Kansas, Oklahoma area. But if you're going to feed October, in that area we wouldn't feed any supplement if you have good grass. These would be for spring calving cows, and they're in good condition. Going into November, I'm going to feed 1 pound. Going into December, I'm going to feed 2 pounds of a high protein supplement. What is that? 38% crude protein, which we'll talk about here at Ranchway that we have. Feed 3 pounds of that high protein supplement in January, and you 3 pounds through March, and then in April you cut it down to 2. Now this would be a strategy if your cows are kind of thin. Okay, so you're going to feed the high protein supplements, but then into January and February you're going to switch. You're going to feed something that's lower in protein, a 20% range, to give them that extra energy because they're marginally thin, and they're going into the last trimester where their requirements are going to increase for reproduction. So we're going to switch over here, and you notice you go up drastically in crude protein. Now, this is based off of real data, real studies. I would say in Colorado, I didn't find any real studies, so my advice would be, because we're on a different pattern. If you look at now, there's a lot of grasses dormant now. I'd say October, maybe even late September, bump this up to 1 pound here and ship. But this gives you a place to start, and you adjust it according to the condition of your cattle. So this is a great kind of a starting place to supplement your cattle. And again, if they're in good condition, you can get away with just a high protein supplement, but you have to have enough forage out there, enough dry forage, either through hay or through pasture. All right. I want to give you, because I've actually met people who've tried this. It doesn't work. You cannot provide an energy supplement if you don't have adequate protein. So if your forage is missing in protein, you know, and hay too. We've tested a lot of hay here. Most of it's excellent quality, but I've tested some marginal hay as far as protein goes. And they're going to be marginally deficient. So when the cattle are deficient, you're feeding forage either through hay or pasture that's deficient in protein. As that grass starts to brown up, it's the protein quality, or the amount of protein's gone down drastically. So as that happens, you cannot feed an energy supplement. They did a study where they just poured the corn to cows on poor quality forage, or average to poor quality forage, low protein. And those cattle continue to lose weight no matter how much corn they ate, because corn is only 0.7, 0.9% crude protein. It's not enough protein to meet their needs. So no matter how much corn you feed to them, there's not enough bacteria in the rumen to allow them to grow. So you have to have protein. You can't just go out and pour corn to them, even though corn is less expensive now. You have to have the protein in there with the energy, or it's not going to work. Okay, just a little caution statement real quick. All right, let's look at our protein sources. This is where we'll kind of get into what I would say maybe a little bit of the we can disagree on some of this, but this is going to be based off of my experience, but also off of research. And I may step on some toes here. That's what I was trying to say. So we can certainly cuss and discuss this later if you want to give me a call and say you don't believe this. But in my opinion, on low quality roughage, plant origin proteins are better than non-protein nitrogen like urea. And I got data to back that up too. Okay, but so when on low quality forage, plant origin, soybean meal, cottonseed meal, distillers, wheat mid, that is a better source of protein than urea. When you're feeding small amounts of a supplement, less than 0.5% of their body weight, 1,000-pound cow, if you're feeding less than 5 pounds, they're not going to utilize that NPN like they would if you're feeding more. So I'm not against NPN. So I've formulated a lot of supplements that have NPN. So when should I feed NPN? The ideal times are when more than 3 of these are true. Okay, that's the rule of thumb that I was taught. That's what I'm going to pass on to you. When more than 3 of these are true, when greater than 0.5% of the body weighted supplements, so you're feeding more than 5 pounds for a 1,000-pound cow. I do not like to feed NPN to small calves. If their calves are greater than 600 pounds, when protein deficiency is marginal, when you don't have this huge deficiency in protein, when it's just marginal deficient, that's the time to pull that NPN, give them a bump. NPN, urea, biuret, can be a very cheap source of protein. When you have a blend of plant and NPN is used, I like to have certainly a big part of that supplement is plant-based, soybean meal, cottonseed meal, sunflower meal, distillers, okay? And when you're providing more than 1 time per day, the ideal situation would be when all of these are true, but when you're feeding more than once a day, that allows them to better utilize that NPN. When you're feeding a blend of protein, plant protein, and NPN when they're greater than 600 pounds. When 3 of these things are true, that's the time to use your NPN. Also want to throw out there real quick, there's lots of studies to back this up as well. I didn't have time to go into them today, but you can feed alfalfa. Alfalfa, there's studies that show that alfalfa can do just as well as a grain protein supplement when fed correctly. So alfalfa is a great way to meet these protein deficiencies that we've talked about. All right. Interval feeding. I get this question a lot, and these studies come out of a group that I did my PhD under at OSU. They looked at, okay, when I feed my cattle, this first one is going to be in Table 6, an old study. Table 7 is a newer study. But they fed cattle every 2 days, every 4 days, or every 6 days, and they looked at performance. Now, these numbers are going to be funny because this is the same group of cattle that I did my PhD with. Their goal is to have these cows in very good condition going in the fall, and then they let them lose weight. So they come in maybe a 6, and they want them to lose down to a 5. So they're going to lose a lot of weight. That's their program. That's how they do it. So these numbers may look funny, but the performance is what we're looking at. When you feed every 2 days, every 4 days, or every 6 days, so you're going to feed 5 pounds of a 41% supplement, in this example, a cottonseed meal supplement, 10 pounds or 15 pounds. And you can see their performance, their calf weaning weights, and their performance were very similar. They're not statistically different. Okay? They did a newer study where they fed 3 times a week versus 6 days. So feed it 6 days, take Sunday off. The cows came in at this weight, and you can see again, pregnancy rates were 98% and if they fed every 3 days, and 94% if they fed every 6 days. We had phenomenal pregnancy rates at that herd of cattle. And a lot of the, I don't know about this particular year, but a lot of times they would get 90% AI. So, great management, but you can see, didn't matter if we supplemented 3 times a week versus 6 times a week. All right, so my point is, and that goes back to where we talked about they can recycle that nitrogen, and cattle can get maximum use out of that supplement, so you don't have to supplement every day. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about cows. I want to throw this in here as well. This is it's called the Oklahoma, it's either Gold or Super Gold program. But basically, you can read down here, you're going to supplement 1 pound of a 38 to 41% range cube to growing calves on pasture. How they perform. This is phenomenal to me. You can look, and I didn't get into the economics of it here, but this economically pays off as well. All right. Look at the initial weight they came in, so they're different weights, these calves. You can look at the control, they got no supplement, and the supplement, they got 1 pound of a 38 to 41% range cube. Okay? And look at their average daily gain. This is how much you added by supplement. You added almost half a pound by just giving 1 pound of supplement. Look at the conversion rates. This is how much supplement it took to gain 1 pound. 1.8 pound in this year to gain 1.8 pound of supplement gave you an extra pound of gain. That's phenomenal. If you think about it like cattle, generally you're looking at 6, 7, 8 pounds of feed per pound of gain. This is just 1.8 to 2, roughly 2.5 pounds of supplement gave you an extra pound of gain. Why? Because we're increasing forage intake. They're eating more, but not only are they eating more, they're getting more out of it. So these calves are on kind of, and these are not calves that are on just dead grass either. They're on moderate forage. By just giving a high protein supplement, 1 pound a day, you get extra half a pound a day gain. I mean, that's to me is phenomenal. Pays off. This has been shown over and over and over again, not only at OSU but other state universities as well. Okay, so feed a high protein supplement pays off in growing calves as well. All right, real quick, I want to end by, like I did last time with talking about, well, what can Ranchway do for you? So give me a second to get to my my internet here, and we'll discuss that. So here's Ranchway's products. This is on Ranchway's website. This is just looking at our beef feeds. So just like we talked about, we have all those products that we talked about. Oh, let me pull it up where y'all can see people who are here. Okay. So we have all the products we just talked about. We have the 20%. We got 3 different types of 20% cubes. We have our all natural Wrangler cake. We have our grassland cake, and we have our premium cake. With the difference being, we have our high end and the premium cake. We have our high end trace minerals and vitamins in our premium cake. So we got our 20s. If you need to put weight on your cattle, and like we talked about in those situations, we have the 20% crude protein. Maybe you're looking for something middle of the road. You want a little bit of energy, but you got to meet that protein requirement too. We have 2 options for 28. crude protein. So we have our high fat, high protein cake. We also have our Range Master all stock wafers that are 28% crude protein, and then we have our premium cake that's 30% crude protein. So that's kind of that middle of the road. Then we have our high end, which is what we spend a lot of time talking about, high protein, 38% premium cake. It's more expensive, but you got to look at the cost per pound of protein like we did in that example. And so we have the high protein. So we have the supplements to meet all of those needs that we talked about. So the question is, what's missing in your diet? And or you can just follow one of the outline plans that I gave you, like going into fall, feed a high protein supplement, and if they're lower body condition score, switch to 28 or 20 and give you more energy. If they're in good condition, continue feeding a high protein supplement. You're growing calves that are out on pasture, same thing. That extra pound per head per day, that has been consistently shown across. There's not very much there's not very many research projects that you do that consistently show that added gain of getting that high protein supplement. So, again, look at what you're missing, and that's where you can get with your Ranchway sales rep, get with me or Meg, nutritionist, and we can help you set up a supplementation program that'll work for you. Now, real quick, this is the last thing I'll talk about. I want to really quick show you, and this is if you look at the last slide, I have the references where these came from. Again, these slides are where you can access them. But also, I'm going to give you a very quick, if you don't want to set up tables and you don't want to do all this, I want to give you a calculator program that you can use. So I like this. It's the OSU Calculator, COW. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Go to this. I have this website in the presentation. Click on download, and it has instructions too. But real quick, I want to show you this program. I like this program. I've had students who've done an excellent job working with producers with this program. So the first thing you do is you set in your conditions. Let me get over here. Okay? My thing's in the way. Give me just a second. Okay. So you can look at you're going to put in your conditions first. Okay? Put in your name. You put in the number of cows you have. You put in where you're going to calve, because what that's going to determine their nutrient requirements. And that allows you to determine by early lactation, late gestation, what are my supplementation needs. This does all the work that we just talked about. It even makes adjustments by breed. So you put in the breed of cattle you had, their weight, their body condition score, what condition you want. So if they're too thin, okay, let's say they were a 4, 4.5. Again, you want your cows to calve in a body condition score 5.5. If they're too thin, it'll allow you to gain weight. You put in your requirements. You pick the feeds that you want to use. This is the feeds, common feeds. We have our range cubes here, and you have other feed stuffs as well. You pick what you want to feed, and you go to the balancer page. I don't have time to do this today, but you just put in how many pounds you're going to feed of your, in this example, range, winter range. They're going to feed a little bit of alfalfa hay, a little bit of 20s. You want your intake ratio, because you can change these numbers to whatever you want. There's two things you want to look at. You want your intake ratio to be 1 here. And you want to get this number over here as close to 1 as possible. So if you click on this arrow, it'll tell you this level should be as close to 1 or greater. And then you look at your average daily gain. So feeding this right here, feedstuffs, they're going to lose about 0.35 pounds per day. And our average daily gain, we were over the time period we're going to feed, how it was set up, we wanted to lose a half of body condition score. So we're going to lose our desired average daily gains. We're going to let them lose. Again, OSU, that herd that's designed this way to lose condition. So in about 226 days, you'll lose the body condition score, and it lets you look at your calcium and the phosphorus ratio as well. So a really good program. Get in there and play with it. We don't have time to go into detail today, but I would encourage you to use this program or get with me. I'd be happy to help you do it as well. So again, those are kind of my philosophies on supplementation. I appreciate your attendance, and if you have any questions at all, please contact me. I'd be happy to go over some of this with you. If you want to, like I said, cuss and discuss some of that MPN stuff, I'd be happy to do that with you as well. We can get into some of that. So I want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate your attendance. Thank you.